All right. Welcome, Andreas.
Hello.
Kirby, hi. Do you want to intro anything, Andreas?
Well, we can cut this out, but I just wanted to say I am Andres Kulikauskas, and this is Math for Wisdom, a meeting of the Knowledge Engineering Study Group with Daniel. But this is an expansion of our usual activity where Kirby and Daniel they have topics of interest in knowledge engineering and synergetics, and then Kirby will be publishing this, so you can keep or not this intro, but Kirby and Daniel, I'm excited, where this will go.
Yeah, it was a week of many developments in Math for Wisdom, emails, as well as in Quadrays. And Kirby, you could give any kind of this week in synergetics, but several from my side that we can talk about is the language model, Claude 3 and local language model working. And big question about understanding and mapping the IVM and XYZ. Those were a few of the pieces that were exciting for me recently. Also, the person standing inside of the TET, body positions, and then what that looks like. What
Yeah,
else do
that
you?
that standing inside stuff. Were you at the D.W. Jacobs presentation on Trim Tab?
I don't think
Trying
I was. I don't think I was there, but I listened.
to okay, because there is literature on that, and I wasn't sure how much you were referencing that or just rediscovering and so forth. I liked the body involvement. Um, I'm finding Coda useful. Do we all see the same background, like the theme? Because I like a dark theme, but I don't know how much is just me. What do you see on Coda? Dark, right? It's kind of black screen with white letters, right?
You can choose the theme. Here, I'll
Does
just
each does each person choose the theme for themselves, or have you chosen it for all of us?
no each person appearance,
Okay.
but I also have like a so that's light
Oh,
Like,
mode.
like
I
I see,
see.
that's the one I see. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
appearance.
That answers my question. So that's not something you fix for people. They get to goof with that.
Correct.
They want to.
Um, yeah, the one thing I'll just note is recently the privileging changed so like a non-document maker cannot make new pages. However, like the canvas function is functionally a page. So you can put pages within this and canvases within this and things like that. However, it restricts the kind of so I think one of the topics that's always what the group works out and everything and what people like to read and how they like to contribute, emojis and writing. It's just like how much subtree nesting on the left, how much internal linking, because those links are of limited utility outside, except by going into the coda versus like linking out like a link tree. So, but the cool thing is it can be all those things because you can just collapse parts that are not being focused on.
Okay. My general thrust of my questions is, and this relates to math or wisdom more generally, it's like I see the synergetics angle as long as it has something nitty gritty and mathematical in it, and it's not just putting labels on polyhedrons, which I consider more business oriented. But if it's got quadrats, let's say, I think I can attract a clientele that because they come in through this door, they move on to the wiki and they encounter math for wisdom in a broader sense, wondrous wisdom, and so on. In other words, the people I think Andreas needs to have more conversations with who have a higher level of fluency around polynomials, for example, they could come in through this door, some of them. I'm not saying a flood of people or anything. I'm just saying we're missing some key conversationalists in this picture, and I'm hoping to recruit them. But a secondary benefit I have through this coda and doing quadrays again, partly to learn coda, but also to put my latest thinking about quadrays in some form that's public, is I can update my peers, such as yourself, such as Stroopy in Germany, such as so and so somewhere else. Hey, here's what I'm doing on Quadrays most recently. I know you've checked it before. I know we've talked about it before. But if you want to see what I'm doing within the last 48 hours, for example, this is where I'm currently working. And that's why I like public resources, because you can let people look over your shoulder and you don't know who they are always. They can be perfect strangers because anyone can take it and put it in an email and say, hey, I know this guy Kirby, he's working on Quadrays. What do you think about this? And for all we know, we'll attract like a John Baez type that way, right? Someone that Andreas is looking forward to having more conversations with about, say, category theory or those kinds of topics. They might come in through this door. That's what I'm thinking. Dual benefit for us because I can attract people, but I can also attract conversationalists worthy of wondrous wisdom attention. That's my model.
I'll
You
say
could
on that. I mean,
on the AI thing, that was a fascinating experiment. What you did is you fed, as I understand it, I'll repeat it back to you. You fed some of my repos on GitHub to an AI engine, the Perplexity one, and basically told it distill the source code down into some essential methods or something in that order. And in its favor, I'd say it came out with grammatically, syntactically runnable Python that actually did do computations. And on the downside, it doesn't do what it purports to do. I mean, it doesn't to me make sense what it's doing. But
yeah,
that's okay. It gave me an opportunity to compare its results to what I would call the correct results. And that was in itself another way for me to share Quadrays.
thank you. Yeah, just about this. So the zeroth layer is just by truth dropping the GitHub. It's included in the training data probably. So it doesn't, there's like that, any response is kind of interesting. Then Perplexity is a front end for what can be it can do GPT-4, Claude 3, like every time a new model comes out, they integrate it with their web search. So first, because I assumed that that wasn't part of its code-based training, brought in and used the internet search for it just to bring all that into its context, then to kind of do RAG, aka semantic search, on your repo. Alternatively, Cursor is a VS Code fork that it's very rapidly improving and basically uses language not local model only API, I think, embeds all the code in an actual repo. So you could clone in all of these repos. That would be the next local step to try. But this was just the quick web-based, bring it into its kind of web. But here it knows the links, but here it would actually know the code patterns itself.
I don't think I
Then,
saw that table before, so that's cool.
oh yeah, though yeah, that was the top part of the conversation. Then try to just make some sort of synthesis. But we can, but the and
See,
then
that all worked, and not only does it work, it doesn't get the right answer, but it runs. It's nicely color coordinated, isn't it? Do I get to do that somehow in Coda? Like I haven't managed to make my code look as nice as that code.
this is on perplexity.ai. So this is
Oh,
like
forget. Okay, I made a
this is
mistake.
$20. Yeah, yeah. But that being said, also Coda, here's what the Coda AI looks like. Write a summary of then this. Oh, there aren't. So it doesn't have visual. So that's why the code blocks are so useful and
Okay,
LaTeX code.
the viewer is going to think that Perplexity just spit out my whole essay just now. That's pretty cool. That's what it looks like. I didn't
Yeah,
see the unfortunately thing until later. So it looked like, boom, there's everything I just wrote AI generated. It's like, pretty cool.
yeah, it really blurs the line between like, oh, whereas like a Google search or search engine search, and then it's more like a fast library. But then this is kind of
Right.
like library
Those functions
system.
don't exist anywhere in my code base, I don't think. So that was clever of it to do all that. Quadray midpoint, I don't have anything named that as far as I know. So very cool. I mean, I wouldn't expect it to, I would have been even more blown away had
Oh,
it.
but just to understand it, the AI wrote these
Yes, yes. It took my
immediately?
repo and synthesized its own idea of what was going on in there. And it
Wow.
produced runnable Python code, but I would say nonsense. But
Oh,
that's it doesn't work, but it doesn't do what it's supposed to, but it does run. That's what I'm saying.
it looks like
It
okay.
looks credible. It's like,
For like
damn,
a movie, for a movie or
for
something.
a movie. Very good point. That's what it looks like. I've noticed really cool stuff about AI. Like another friend of mine, he's doing AI DALL-E stuff, and they wanted to show students feeling intimidated by equations or something. And he wanted Maxwell's equations, and he kept trying to specify the equations. But all DALL-E will do is draw stuff that looks very equation-y. But if you look closely, it's not even readable. It's just, it looks like a chalkboard full of math squiggles, but it isn't quite right. So that's kind of spooky, really. It's like it's not even semantically sensible, but it
Well,
does have the look
it's
and
an
feel.
imposter. I think
It's an
that's the whole point,
imposter, yeah.
right? So, like, how much, I mean, are you fascinated by an imposter? Like,
Yes.
well, you are. You see, like, whereas for me, it's
Yes.
like, get away,
It's kind of
right?
like comedians who do impressions of Trump or whatever. It's like, yeah, we've got our robot to imitate us, and it's hilarious, I have to say. Anyway. I'm interested in the AI angle, and I really appreciate what Daniel did and the whole thing of Coda. For me, it's like I already kind of know what a wiki is, although it always does more than I realize. And on Coda, I felt some fulfillment just because I got a squiggly line to go across. And what I've been doing is trying to section out certain contributions that I've made that's okay, here's what Kirby did and leave room. I'm trying to be suggestive. Okay, so Kirby wrote this, he put squiggly lines around what he wrote, but it's wide open. And one of my questions about, like, you guys already met before once, but I'm thinking the people section here, for example, it mentions like 5 of us. But what do we envision? Is this the kind of thing that we would want to, in principle, shoot for 100, right? Or in principle, we already have enough, or what? What is that? The deepest value table I'm talking about under people in the coda. And then it's interesting, those people who are mentioned in that table then seem to be creating this coda together, and I see their initials all over the place, and that seems interesting to me. It's like, as an outsider, I'm trying to think of myself as just a pure outsider. Math for wisdom coda, what is this? And it could be intriguing. That's what I hope it is, at least, right? Intriguing. You get a lot of good look for not much work. Yeah, ontology. That was one of my questions. The difference between a cognitive framework and an ontology. I don't know if that's still a relevant question or not.
For me, it's relevant in the sense that thanks to our interactions, I'm just realizing how crucial it is for me to try to explain what I mean by these conceptual structures or cognitive frameworks, conceptual frameworks, right? That's a very important thing. And so, like an ontology typically would be a whole vocabulary. So, like when I have my vocabulary page, I could call that my ontology page pretty much, because it's how's your whole vocabulary? Whereas a conceptual structure is like it's like a unit of meaning, so to speak. It's saying, like, from the point of view of absolute truth, it's what does it mean to know at least something, in absolute truth? Okay, something would have the form of a relationship between different concepts, you see. So as you go delve and delve deeper and abstract away, like maybe a picture would be, people take the SAT test, Scholastic Aptitude Test, and I don't know if it is anymore, but they used to have analogy sections. So the idea is that, well, do you know all these sophisticated words? Do you collect them or think about them, as you're applying for college? Are you preparing for that? Well, how do we know that you know these words really actively? Well, we're going to set up some analogies, and you're going to have to choose multiple choice. So one level is, okay, there's these words, but the other is like, oh, there's these relationships, which might just be opposites, right? Like, so you realize that they're asking for the opposite. But there could be maybe, so that's more abstract, but it could be like, well, let's classify the analogies that appear in SAT tests. Maybe there's like 5 or 6 different kinds of analogies. You see, that's one level deeper than the analogies themselves. And so the general trend, I really was thrilled by Daniel's example yesterday, where he talked about the 20 pairs of pants. So like, if we could find, if we had a used clothing pile, and you could just sort through and say, what can we learn about human beings biologically from their clothing pile? Then you'd have to figure it out, like, well, do shoes connect with shirts, or do shoes connect with pants? So you do a study and whatever, and you look at patterns, but you'd figure out, hey, like, the shoes seem to connect to the pants just based on size, for example, statistically, right? As opposed to shirts. You'd figure it all out. There's a whole study. That's exactly how the research into wondrous wisdom goes. It's saying that there's something deeper that we're trying to reconstruct. And so if you look at deep thinkers are tending to pull up and percolate things that are reflecting that. And so they may have their own thing, but you go, look, you're basically saying what this other deep thinker's saying, but there's actually, what's really exists is something even deeper than that. You're just giving 2 different ways to play with that. And maybe just to respond to what you said in the beginning, like, the real treasure, I'm very grateful. Like, I just realized more and more how Daniel from before and vice versa. I was listening to Daniel's video from 3 years ago about Blake and Bucky, and so that whole universe. See, the whole point of our community is to find Daniel, right? So if we can, the long route is, you attract 10,000 viewers, 100,000 viewers, and you get maybe 1,000 comments, and then maybe 100 people sign up to the discussion group, and it turns out 10 are not lurkers, and then of those 10, 9 is noise, and then 1 is Daniel, you see. So we could just skip all that and just go straight to Daniel. And you help to do that because you have this reputation that, well, I think sometimes I think your reputation contributed. So how do we get to Daniels?
I'll bring you an army of Daniels. And not just for you, but I think Daniel needs an army of Daniels. It's like,
for example,
we need to meet each other here. So under your very nose, as we study wondrous wisdom, we will also be organizing our army to do this or that. But I want you to have sufficient philosophical distance from the kind of stuff I do, including around the edges of what you do, so that you don't get sucked into things you don't know anything about. Like, if Daniel and I plan a massive protest, like a Maidan thing, and there are like 10,000 people shouting in some square somewhere, I don't want you to be implicated, because we didn't tell you we were going to do this. There's nothing in your wiki about it. So we need to have
the cruise missile coming here, right? Like,
what's that?
You don't want me to be the target of the cruise missile.
Yeah, I don't want you to freak out. Like, I don't want you to worry about being guilt by association. So I think there needs to be some level of distance between, what we do.
Well, there needs to be many levels,
mutual respect.
So, yes, something naturally lovely about you. Well, I think that's one thing I picked up from yesterday, and just in general, is that our group is so small, and we don't have a project, quote unquote, to work on, but we do have some kind of funky positive energy, where we're hanging with each other. And so I kind of realized like, well, that's where it is, just let that flow, right? Like, so that's one evaluation. But it's very nice that like you'll be able to publish this because that kind of like starts to overlap and kind of like change the boundaries, make the boundaries more kind of like these ant colony zones. They have some kind of zones, these different worlds or these ant colonies overlap or they
The ant
connect.
colony thing is working out for me, and I think it's an extension of your sociology track with Aslam. And I think that and your connection to Pashtun Institute,
Mhm.
that's been valuable to me. And I can mine that, I can get value from that onwards from here. In other words,
Mhm.
there's low hanging fruit here at Math for Wisdom. And I don't always have to like file a report or something. It's like, hey, I've founded this whole new institute based on this other thing. And it's like you won't ever find out about it because you've got your own life to worry about, right? You got your own stuff to do. So I
Right.
think your model should be you're rippling outward, having an effect, you're making a difference in ways you'll never know. And that's okay. That's how it is for all of us. It's not like you're totally exceptional in that regard. We're not picking on you or with
Right.
selectively withholding information. But the flip side of that is I don't want you to feel dragged into things that you had nothing to do with. And yet, our names are now intertwined because we both contribute to these projects. So there's always that tension when two see, I think of you as a great thinker, but I'm as vain as they come as well.
Mhm.
So I'll collaborate with you, but I'm not going to like when it comes to say cognitive frameworks. I'm somewhat interested in what you think that means, but I also have to check with the business community. In other words, I assume that the term cognitive framework has already got some currency. So when I think about how to do cognitive frameworks, what you think they mean, that's somewhat interesting, but it's not the whole story. I have to find out what it really
Well,
means. The absolute truth, not what Andreas thinks. You get the difference.
in cognitive frameworks, just a term, it can be changed and replaced. It's not really relevant. I mean, and
No,
so
it
where
is.
did I
It's
pick that up?
totally relevant. We got to have the right
Well,
term.
I'll tell
Otherwise,
you the history
if
of
you
it.
change it
I'll tell you.
later, you'll
No,
throw
I
everybody
change it.
off.
Well, it's not that old of a term. I probably started like in
It's not nothing to do with
2017.
you. No, 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 no. When did cognitive frameworks become common
Well,
currency?
I'm trying to explain like how I latched
Yeah, but
onto
that's
that
not
term and
interesting.
why I
That's
would
when
like.
you started using it. We're not saying
So I'm
that's
trying to
50%
explain
of
my
it.
understanding. I'm trying to explain my understanding is that
Okay.
there's cognitive science, you see.
Mm.
Like, and I think the point is that for me, they were metaphysical frameworks, but metaphysics is a dirty word. Like metaphysics is just an awful, in our time, metaphysics is considered like, you-who. So I said, well, okay, I'm not going to use the word metaphysical framework. I'll say, look, I'm going to lean on cognitive science and, from the 70s or whatever, or the 80s, let's say, right? Like
After
Lakoff.
you talk, I want to hear Daniel's perspective on is the word metaphysics doomed after you're finished?
Well, these are all changing things, but I'm just saying that, writing, giving academic presentations from 2014 to let's say 2018, I had to make word choices, term choices. What am I doing? So those were just some of the choices I made. Talking to you and others, I guess, and just to add, like, what's helpful for me is to have a small quality group that's interested in modulating, changing its behavior, you see not in trying to fight over knowledge, but like to say, like, can we get a way of, so knowledge engineering in terms of engineering our behavior. And if a small group can click, then it'll expand naturally. So,
See, I see you as stating publicly that your goal is to get something that's kind of a private language that's kind of unique to you, get it out there and get it more public. And I want to assist you in doing that. And one way of doing that is to meet them halfway, as they say, which means, sure, you can use all your private meanings for everything. Oh, this is what I mean by gravity. This is what I mean by radiation, like Bucky does. He makes up this private sky of his own meanings for all these key words. And then if you study other thinkers, you can find other people who kind of did that. They use
I'm trying to
gravity.
say it's the opposite. Like I'm saying, look, it is unfortunately socially it's my private language, but I'm saying I'm talking about things that are it's a universal language, you see,
Right.
the
But
social
that
statuses.
means
But
you
I'm
have
trying
to.
to say it's universal. You can use whatever terms you like. I try to use the most everyday terms to show, like, to show that people actually are familiar with these things, like whether, what, how, why. That's not how Plato talks about it. That's not how Aristotle talks about it. So instead of saying there's the efficient cause and the formal cause and the material cause and the final cause, I say no, there's whether, what, how, why. You see, every child knows that distinction. And so what I'm trying to say is you call it whatever you like, but let's learn through our behavior, what are we referring to? You see, I'm not trying to inspire people like Bucky or get them to do their own thing. I'm saying, no, let's get on the same page. You see, how can we get on the same page in terms of actual behavior, actual choices, actual reality?
Right. And that means you're going to have to act more like they do, not they're going to have to act more like you, because
No, I have to find two or
there's
three
more of
people.
them than there are of you. That's always going to be the
It's
case.
not my problem. You see, that's God's
No,
problem.
it's your problem. I'm afraid it is.
No, it's God's problem. You have to be able to distinguish.
Oh,
One will
God's
scale.
problem. Oh, that's very clever of you. I'll have to remember that.
Well, that's right.
Very
Learn from
tricky.
me.
Those
Let's learn from
religious
me.
people
So,
are very tricky. Whoa, whoa,
yeah.
whoa, whoa.
So
It's
the
God's
point is that I'm trying to make it work, and then it'll scale naturally. Get the thing that actually works in terms of what I really want to say. This is what really needs to be understood and figured out. Then it'll scale naturally.
Anyway,
So I
Daniel,
only need like 2-3 people who want to
Okay,
understand this language truly. I'm sorry, so I interrupt, but
yeah, yeah. I mean, great times. I mean, as we've heard and discussed recently, it's not a syntax or term-based language. It's a language beyond that's about what it's being pointed towards. So I definitely hear this, that like your emphasis is on a group that can speak the semantics. And then if then someone says, I made this English terms list and this is how I'm talking about this structure within this way, then there could be multiple different natural language. And I mean, and I'm basing my experience there just based upon the ontology for the active
Mhm.
inference ontology, where we
Oh, right.
constructed a terms list, but we could have constructed languages, we could have math, we have names, other namespace and variables,
Mhm.
because in a lot of ontology engineering, like there is a separate there's a difference between the term and then like how it's like rendered or localized,
Mhm.
which is so that's that. I mean, if it really is about, but then as Kirby
Well,
rightly
and
brings
then
up, people are gonna hear cognitive framework. They're gonna think Dave Snowden. They're gonna think just what all discourse that they are gonna distantly or closely know about. But this is the trade-off with making new words
I think Edward
versus.
de Bono is a good one, and I've heard Andreas bring up his name, so that's helpful. I think pattern language is helpful. He brings that up quite a bit. When we talk about patterns, there's a big connection between pattern language, and what Andreas calls cognitive frameworks, which are fairly small and fairly tight. They're not whole systems. They're not the whole way that Hegel thought. See, at first, that's what I thought he meant, because he was waving that book around, the one about different mindsets. And those try to give the entire thinking of a particular thinker in one
Mhm.
or two pages, which is difficult to do. But that's not what he means. Andreas does not
Right.
mean that when he says cognitive framework. He means something much smaller, like an OODA loop, like stand, follow through, reflect, like that. And I was thinking, you'll find this under projects, I think, in this coda, where I've been
Mhm.
expanding my thinking on cognitive frameworks, that the cognitive frameworks in Wondrous Wisdom itself, not importing from outside, not Charles Peirce, none of that, just
Mhm.
in Wondrous Wisdom, what are the cognitive frameworks and how many are there? And this may already be there and already be a wiki page with exactly what I'm asking. So I'm kind of just wondering, is there this
So
already?
exactly. So because of Jerry Northrup, I wrote because he was studying the Wondrous Wisdom. I said, look, I need to show you where it, how to find all this information. So I made the vocabulary page. It points to about 10 different pages. If you go to the main, yeah, go to there and then go on the left-hand side, you'll see vocabulary if you go further down. But yeah, exactly. So if you go to this page and you'll see there's like 12 sections or so. And if you pick any one of those sections, typically there'll be a link and you can delve in further. And then if you click on a link, you'll get a bunch of pages, like to presentations and stuff. So it's all linked in there. But the crucial thing is that
Problem is,
this,
it's not very pictorial, and
no,
usually,
well, the point is, it will take me years to write it out and make it available. But the point is, that's why that video I just uploaded that you saw, the 2 hours, I spent 2 hours going very quickly through all that to somebody who understood what I was talking about to say, well, this is the overview, right? So just so that someone like Jerry can realize it's not just this, it's not just that. Like there's this, it's all of this. So, but I think in terms of projects, it was very cool to see the ontology page for active inference. And one project for me, at least, would be to sit down. There may be 100 or 200 terms there, I don't know, or 300 or 400. But just to,
64.
pardon,
In
how
the
many?
64 are in the core.
So then I could translate them all into Wondrous Wisdom, probably. You see, that's, I think, a very good project for me to do. Then you'll be able to say, okay, this is what active inference would look like, and this is how it hooks into. I just need the URL for that. If you could make that available um, for us, then
I'll put it in the chat too.
okay,
Yeah, or any other language, that you speak that's not here.
exactly. And
you
so,
got Lithuanian in there?
No.
I don't think you do. I think you should add a column
DVD.
for Lithuanian, and maybe to the extent Andreas has any time, he can show off his knowledge of Lithuanian. I remember going to Lithuania and the culture shock when I opened my blogger, right, just to add to my Google blog. It was all in Lithuanian because it was localized, and it just assumed just because I was in Lithuania that I now spoke Lithuanian. It's like, wow, look at my blog. It's not the blog itself had changed to Lithuanian. It's just all the buttons, all the menus, everything, the infrastructure was all in Lithuanian. It's pretty cool. But I think that's another aspect of Wondrous Wisdom that people need to appreciate and realize is that there's so much accessible in Lithuanian. So I think you should have a lot of native Lithuanian people involved in this, people who speak.
well, that's unfortunate that there aren't. I mean, like I
Well,
have
that's
two
a big,
friends in Lithuania, and they're both English speakers. You see, and they're participating. But
the way a rock band gets famous in the US now is they go over to Europe and they spread the buzz. It's like that starts getting back over here. It's like, whoa, they're big in Europe. So then when they come back to the US, everyone's now curious. So I think you're just going to need to get really big over here. Like in Oregon, everyone's going to know who you are. And then the Lithuanians will finally figure out that you're a world figure. We just have to amplify your presence out in this other world first. It's already the case, actually.
well, and I think, see, those are the things I don't think about. Like what I think about is like, what is Kirby passionate about? How can like Kirby's passionate about quadres, is there any, well, things like, so quadres, I don't know how to connect to, but like the school of, I think, is it called the School of Tomorrow?
Yeah, that was loosely based on a book called The House of Tomorrow, which actually involved somebody trying to train a kid to become the next Buckminster Fuller because she was a
Oh,
huge fan. And she was kind of oppressive. She was kind of a fascist. So people who like House of Tomorrow aren't necessarily Bucky fans. They may think he's finally
fascist.
being put in his place.
Well,
But
okay,
School
but
of
if you have a
Tomorrow was
project
like,
that you're passionate about, like
I
the
was
School
thinking,
of
would the
Tomorrow,
kid
or
be
what,
learning if this kid in the House of Tomorrow really were learning Bucky stuff? What would that look like, especially today in 2020s? So that's how I came up with School of Tomorrow.
so the School of Tomorrow, like if you're passionate about that, like in Wondrous Wisdom, the email group or wiki or Zoom or whatever, but like if you just keep digging into yourself, like why are you passionate about this? What is that passion all about? You see, that's very useful because we're getting to see you as a human being, and we have the chance of connecting with you on that level. You see, then maybe Wondrous Wisdom can be useful to that. Like that's the point. Or like I brought this up before, but like making a Bucky cheat sheet. You see, like to say, look, can we work together and figure out like how did Bucky, what's the way that Bucky looked at the world? Make that in terms of his epistemology. Like I would find that useful. See, on that level, I'd like to interact with people, not about the superficial things he did, but what is the Bucky way of thinking, let's say, right? Like, and so first of all, kind of like Well, I would just find that helpful to understand for my own sake, but for connecting with that whole community, because we have people like you and John and Daniel who are active there. So,
I mean, I'm thinking more in terms of American pragmatism and since the Civil War, the evolution of
mhm.
American philosophy. And I'm kind of asking myself, to what extent do those Europeans like Andreas want to be a part of the American scene? Like, do you want to be up to date on American philosophy at all or not? I don't know. Maybe not. It's
Well, like I'm a little familiar. Like I was in Warsaw. I talked to Searle. I think it is it Searle, I guess. He was like a logician philosopher. Like I asked him, because he's one of the 10, he's sometimes listed on the top 10 philosophers of all time. I just asked, like, well, could I ask what is his deepest value, you see, in life, which includes all the other values? And like that's a non-question for him. Basically say, like, that does not like see. So that kind of shows like the kind of person he is. You
you
see,
took
like,
that lying down. You must have pushed him. You must have needled him a little bit.
no, I just saw like that's the relation. I did my effort to make that bridge. That's where he is.
I thought you might have tied him into a chair and said, "You're not leaving this room until you cough it up, buddy."
No, I think it was I mean, it was frustrating. I had come to Warsaw because of a conference on religion and logic. I had offered to talk about this whole God's dance that I'd figured out. Like, it's the whole, well, it's a modern understanding of the Trinity, but it's basically 24 ways, that I've understand God in my life, how they all fit together from different points of view. And they just replied, they didn't accept it. And I go, well, why? And they go, well, it doesn't have to do with half our program. I think they meant logic. Like there's no logic. I was basically saying like God is like a state of contradiction. See, so I was considered, with my PhD in math, I was considered like out of bounds with regard to logic. I actually went to the World Congress of Philosophy. I gave that talk there in the philosophy of religion section. People were kind of dumbfounded. They were stunned because here was somebody actually metaphysically just deconstructing the whole thing, in terms of God, like all these ways of looking at how all fits
You
together.
got through their filters. They're like, "Oh my God, how do you get in here?"
No, I think people from different religions, whatever, people were kind of stunned. But see, like, no one wanted to talk to me afterwards because basically they said, we came here to have dinners with our wives. We're all going to Chinese food. Do you see? So you can make a great impression. They don't care. That's because it's really just about going to a fancy
It's more of
restaurant
a
with your
social
wife.
event. It's more of a social event.
Well, but here's the World Congress of Philosophy. They came together, you see, but they don't care. Like, I mean, I can give another example. There was the hall, they had plenaries, 2,000 people would listen. There were 9,000 people in all at this Congress. So 2,000 people would listen. And somebody gave the talk on Marxism. You see, actually, they gave the talk. He was a former president of the American Philosophical Association. He turned out to be a Marxist. It was the 200th anniversary of Marx. So he gave this long talks about the importance of Marxism. And then they had like a pretty long question section, half an hour. And I just asked, I couched the question. I explained, my grandfather was a communist. He was killed by the Nazis. But was he a good person? Like a Nazis, they sort people by class. Could a Nazi be a good person? Well, but no, if you're sorting people by class, by race, let's say, you can't be a good person and do that. Like, can a communist be a good person? Well, basically, no. I mean, because when you sort people by these classes, you're putting children to death, basically. No, I go, there's something, even though he was, in many ways a wonderful person, and so I said, and I go, and you are not a good person, you see. And I said that in front of 2,000 people in communist China. And then there are like 20 Polish people, they clapped. But not a single person there could dare to do the kind of thing I could do, all those philosophers. Or I did it another night. There was somebody talked about empathy as the source of morality, and blah, blah, blah. And I go, look, you just need 1% empathy, but 99% is this principled thinking. You spoke for a whole hour. You had the chance to empathize with people in Tibet who don't have the opportunity to participate here, and you said nothing with that in mind. And you basically are a bad person, I said, in front of 2,000 people. See, so none of them had the guts to talk about Tibet in the whole week. But I know how to look at things from my enemy's point of view. I know how to survive and say that type of thing because I figured that out, you see. just the lousy people they are, all 9,000. It was very disappointing.
You
That's
sound,
reality. See, that's real evidence. That's
I
experimental
understand you're
philosophy.
very disenchanted with those people.
Well, I
Oh,
stay away from them, and so I did my thing. But I could have gone this year to the World Conference in Italy. I'm not going because it's pointless. I'm just, I'm
oh,
here with you. I think that's the point.
I'll make a few points. Yeah, first off, online changed the game. 2020, it's been a whole nother era since then.
Right.
Then just the as Trim Tab has explored a lot, separating out what did Bucky, not needing every single word, but like just what did he actually think and say, including all over the map. Then what is axiomatically in Synergetics the books? And then where does it combine and like touch upon math and computer science and more today? These are good questions, Kirby. I mean, I'm glad that we can continue to work towards them, but there's and I think we can kind of focus on the the um the frontier part with the code and making some like I'm gonna start looking more into the local language models, maybe set up something but and then American pragmatism and philosophy, that's very interesting topics. Is metaphysics doomed? To return to that question earlier, I mean, using Fuller's separation of body and mind with physical and metaphysical, no, I don't think so. But it's even though it's a short question, I feel like it's a very cornering question in certain ways based upon what physics is included as. Like if physics includes cognitive processes, then certain questions about that have been treated metaphysically will be treated physically, but that's not to say reductionistically.
Yeah, I'm agreeing with Andreas that the term metaphysics got a bad name there for a while, and we're still wondering if it's ever going to recover. And therefore, partly that was like his informed choice of his own presentation, his own choice of words. Why he's gone with this and not that is partly because he wants to avoid what happened to metaphysics. It got trashed. And I think, yeah, Fuller is trying to help it make a comeback as a word, partly through ephemeralization. It's like the more familiar we are with the science and the principles behind something, the less physical materials we have to involve when we're making X, like a radio or a computer or whatever. The better we really understand the physics, the smaller and more efficient a radio can be, down to where it just fits in your ear or whatever like that. And so that's an idea of metaphysics, greater competence in science that scientists don't want to quickly drop because it's something they could be. It's like, oh, we're good at metaphysics. It's like maybe we like metaphysics now. But I kind of have the same feeling about synergetics as Andreas does about philosophers. It's like it's been meaty all the time, like way back since it was published in the 70s. It's had these modules. It didn't have quadres. That's something we're adding in retrospect. But there's been a lot of crunchy math there, and I really fault the boomers. It's my generation. It's our fault. He wasn't a boomer. He was a bohemian. He was from a prior generation,
Mhm.
and he got well known for his dome, and that became all you had to know. That was like cocktail party level conversation. It's like, oh, geodesic dome, yeah, they're everywhere, they're beautiful. I'm going to live in a dome. My cousin's building a dome. I know this company in Oregon that's making domes, and blah blah dome dome dome. Oh, but don't they leak? Yeah, domes leak. I hear they leak. Jay Baldwin came up with a very funny story about that, which is that he smuggled the data for how to build a geodesic dome out of Joe Clinton's office, who worked for NASA at the time, before they were ready. In other words, he leaked the code. And so he's like, the dome's leaked because I leaked the code before it was ready. And it's like half true, I guess. Joe Clinton had never really heard it told that way. But Jay Baldwin, who edited the whole Earth catalog there with main guy who gets the credit. He was front lines in the whole dome building movement to some degree, but he wasn't really a hippie. He wasn't like drop out off the grid, all this kind of stuff. And he had a lot of. He wrote a book called Bucky Works, and he very kindly references me in the preface to that. So I have my legacy. I have my name all over the place in Bucky literature. It's like the hand I was dealt. I can't just drop it for something else. So obviously, I'm going to see this through, but I have the same sort of reproachful attitude towards mathematicians. It's like, are you really so proud and vain that you couldn't waste a little time looking into this more and writing actual secondary literature and having papers on this stuff by now? I'm not saying Andreas, this poor guy in Lithuania, why pick on him? But as an industry that churns out billions of papers and fills journals every month, why was this stuff beneath you just because he was not a card carrying PhD mathematician? Why did you ignore all this stuff? And I think the answers are self damning, and they help prove what he was saying in Operating Spaceship Earth is this over specialization where everyone's supposed to know their little niche and know it well and be like a PhD. That's actually a very bad design. And we risk destroying our species because of over specialization. I think he's proving his point by how much neglect has been shown towards this very basic, interesting stuff that includes the platonics. It's like, since when has anyone had anything new to say about polyhedra? And like a unit volume tetrahedron, that's kind of interesting. Oh, you mean the edges are rational as well? Wow. Whoever thought of that? And yet, how many papers have been published? So to me, it looks like mathematicians as a profession have been uber cowards, and I plan to rub that in their face for the rest of my life.
And I just want to concur, like with the over specialization as the problem, and to say, like, I hope in my life and in the Math for Wisdom universe that regardless of how expert we are in different areas, but we're interested in growing, genuinely in all kinds of areas, which can be like learning a little bit more math as relevant, but it also could be like learning more sociology as relevant, learning more biology, I'm starting to learn chemistry and biochemistry, physics. Yeah. So, and I think, but the question is like, it's helpful to filter, to say like, well, I'll learn something if somebody else is passionate about it. So like if you're passionate about quadrates, I have to, I'll keep in mind, okay, what is that about, right? Like if Daniel's passionate about ant colonies, okay, or Jerry is into microbial systems, okay, like, but it's crucial that we're working together, we're, learning, connecting with each other. So
I
think that's
totally
a good
agree with
approach.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah, like too often online discourse it's just like it's like a naked YouTube link. It's like maybe there's a thumbnail that auto loads, maybe you go, it's just like, "Ooh, what about this?" Or what, just that's just rebroadcasting. But it's like if someone's cultivating their own fun fractal research project, especially as we share many of the overarching meta and explicitly like multi framework interests, then we all learn a ton. I mean, it's hard to quantify or qualify sometimes, but the learning rate is highest when we're working with people who are making who are doing passion learning and leaving the stigmergy trail. And then different nestmates in the colony leaving different pheromone trails, and you can't fit everyone into the same shoe. But everyone's gonna leave the traces that they leave, or not.
I like that analogy.
I wanted to before we leave, I did have a question about the ant colonies. Like, is there a way to think of an ant colony like with regard to a mouse? So like a butterfly lives in a world of flowers, like a world of icons, let's say. But a mouse is able to have attention and notice attention. Like a mouse is able to model if a cat is paying attention to the mouse or not, let's say, right? Like, so is there any sense in which an ant colony as a whole can tell if there's being attention paid to it or not, let's say, on any level?
That it is being watched?
Yeah, like for example, that it is being watched, or
Uh,
also does it have a model of itself? So how would that
yeah, good question. If in the 2018 interview with Carl Friston, when we asked him about like the ant colony consciousness, he pointed to features like um temporal depth and the ability to have reflexive self-awareness and counterfactual planning through time. Like those are
Mhm.
features that are important for him, and those are cognitive aspects. Um, there's various ways, like if you walk, if you walk, let's look at a red harvester ants.
Mhm.
So this disc is like um 1 meter in radius.
Mhm.
If you walk near it, then they're going to detect the vibrations. Um, they've existed in cow grazing, so it's not like the vibrations are going to send them into a panic immediately. But if there's like a nest collapse, then that's going to interfere with like foraging, especially if it's at the single
Mhm.
entrance. I don't think that outside of shadows they would have been able to detect me standing over here looking at them per se. So but it does uh bring one to the question of, okay, so let's just say a bunch of nestmates found out about something over here. Does the colony know? Oh, well, the colony doesn't know, just those nestmates do.
Yeah. Mhm.
But it's like, oh, well, does your skin, does the body ever know, or
No,
does only a
so
part of the body know?
so my feeling, okay, so vibrations is a big thing, like maybe blocking the light, would be a bigger thing. But let's say vibration seems like a very good thing, like where everybody knows if there's a lot of vibrations and they're getting bigger, right? Like, that's just affecting everybody in
Or
the colony, right?
yeah,
Like,
or when there's high humidity, like when the humidity is higher, the costs of foraging are lower because water loss is lower because their surface area to volume's so extreme. Um, but if you're out there foraging when there truly is a rainstorm and flash flood in the afternoon, which can just roll in super
mhm.
fast in the area, then you get flooded, and so it's actually, kind of high risk, high reward. So they do make on those days a go no go binary colony decision to plug the nest entrance with
Oh,
rocks.
they plug the nest entrance. I see.
And
That's a colony decision, right?
I always wondered what is their true positive and true and false positive and negative rates, and was the trait that we were studying, which was like the sensitivity of their foraging intensity. How was that like intensity modulation, which was more of a continuous trait that they all had to engage in? Like how did that relate to their binary decision to even like forage at all on a given day?
And so these are the kinds of things where I'm looking for being able to argue that there's two minds, and that you get these, you can flirt with that boundary between. So that's very helpful. Another related is like, what's the role of their protecting the queen? Because a colony without a queen becomes not really,
Yeah.
like
Well,
there's some kind of, I would think like they do, although this isn't emphasized so far in the book, but there must be some kind of defensive response with regard to the queen, right? Like, because the
it,
queen is kind of like the purpose of the colony in a certain sense.
well, certainly she's the reproductive tissue. Um, there's
And the
one
source
say,
of
yeah, yeah,
the
and the
future
stem
queen.
cell. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Reproductive and the stem cell tissue that creates all, and in the red harvester ant case, um, so queen, how and what the queen, how many there are, this is super different with different species. Like the
Mhm.
Pogonomyrmex, one reason why I love this species, single queen, ultra long lived, like 25 to 35 years even, but a
Mhm.
single queen holding on to the sperm from her nuptial flight,
Mhm.
living in the bottom. So she flies, she digs, she raises the first brood. Then, I mean, she's never going to come out again. So she just
Mhm.
goes 6 feet deep, and she's in a very climate controlled, hormonally protected space. And then basically larvae are brought up. And so she's like a conveyor belt, which is so that's like a very extreme. in terms of like, it's a very high stability. It's one of the longest lived insects, period. Whereas like there's other ant species where the Argentine ants, where like the queens are much more just like there's many of them, and they're much more like like there's like, you know, mating happening within the colony, and it's just more of just like blurring with like reproductives and non-reproductives. But the Pygmyrix had a very strict, and also Deborah focuses in her research and discussion on the kind of like adaptive, like foraging activities. We know the least about what happens inside the nest. Foraging is only studyable because we're watching them enter and exit. But a lot of what happens inside of the nest is just, we don't know. But we know about it in these lab flat colonies to a limited extent. But to understand, you know, all the diversities of undisturbed ant queen activities is very unknown.
Okay, so that's helpful. And then another question I wanted to ask you was for the knowledge engineering study group, like what are the questions that you'd like to be pursuing or projects you'd like to be working on?
We can return to it next time. I think one aspect will be just kind of like trying to keep up with Math Wisdom emails, and just you know, merge onto the M4W European highway, and just learn, catch up and write like, you know, weekly summary type stuffs. Then synergetics, keep on using just more of the code and getting more, because I want to execute the code. So either just doing more of a notebook style or local style to use the code embeddings, and just play around, and then just continue to bring in all these other fun elements. But I feel like it's just, these are the things we talked about mainly today, and in a lot of the emails, like just all just being there in the game with you, Andreas, and just learning there. And then on the Quadre frontier, like maybe we could have a package and then translate it across, like, you know, have it in R, Python, Julia or something, and like have a package of methods that have a huge library of Quadre tools, and just made it super easy to call Quadre tools, or, you know, QKit or some other funny name for it. I think that could be a big, and I'm not like that good at writing code de novo, but with these code models and with the local testing, plus Kirby's, you know, experience in actually doing it. But I think that we need that package, so it's not just a conceptual or a historical rabbit hole. That's gonna be a level of pragmatism unseen before. But there's a longer project, longer research project to axiomatize and to formalize synergetics mathematically. But I think especially through Quadres and Kirby's work, we can just get that mapping done.
So I want to just write that down, like axiomatize synergetics mathematically.
Yeah.
That's what you said, right? Like
then,
that's a project, right, that you're interested in.
And one flavor
Maybe
is to
just
understand how it was. And then the other flavor is just to say, okay, you know, they made a few errors in the book probably, or there's a few gaps. So just forget about what they specifically said. Let's just update it and make it simple.
And like if I have the metaphor of the transcontinental railroad, you know, like people working from different sides, like if you, maybe Kirby, you know, if you work from that side of mathematizing it, right? Like I could work on the other side of like coming from wondrous wisdom, where could it connect? So I might first start, you know, I'm working on this ant colony thing for this paper that I'll be writing, but looking at the ontology of active inference, I'd probably start with that. And then I might do, after I have that, like translate that into wondrous wisdom, I could look at, I would probably start with the ways Bucky figured things out and say, look, this is how I try to understand him. But then at a certain point, to be possible, try to do, if you had an ontology, maybe that's what I say. If you made an ontology of Bucky, I could try to translate that into wondrous wisdom, but that would be way off. Does that seem kind of like meaningful?
Yeah. Here's actually from the trim tab coda,
Mm-hmm.
not derelict, but not modified, I don't think, by anyone.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, the idea was like, especially with the numbers. Now, I know
Mm-hmm.
two is not two-ness, it's not two-sum, etc. But
He has
but if
his
there was a
idea there.
hypertext, but if there was a hypertext format, I don't even know or think that code is the right way specifically, but if there was a hypertext format wiki
Mm-hmm.
where through numbers and through where this was,
And can you share that link in the chat?
yeah,
That last one.
yeah, but this is not even at all total, or this was just a few terms just as they came up.
Right.
But I think that could be cool if we did get to a terms list and circulated it with to trim tab and then
Mm-hmm.
got what terms we're missing, what
Mm-hmm.
what terms are extraneous, refined it,
Mm-hmm.
and then we'd at least have synergetics plus Fuller, um active inference and some other kind of like those complement what you're working on well, I think.
And so I think like connecting with ontologies, that's a kind of project, that seems to be appearing. And maybe I can do that with Jerry with his relational symmetry paradigm, and possibly with chemistry and biochemistry, let's say, right? Like to say, okay, this is how wondrous wisdom connects with those subjects, and maybe with. So that's very
And
okay.
also
So
that's I think that's super strong because then you have the disciplinary. Here's biology. It's like, where am I wrong with biology? And then if someone's like,
yeah,
it's like, but if you show, hey, we have this is our disciplinary state of the art understanding, and here's the connection. So do you refute the state of the art understanding,
right.
or do you refute the connection?
Well, and you haven't seen the cheat sheet I've done for biology, have you, or not?
I don't think so. Which page?
If you go on the vocabulary, it actually should be there.
Okay.